Welcome to the May 8th, 2023 meeting of the Community Board 6 Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee. My name is Reshma Patel, and I am chair of the committee. Tonight, we are joined by Assistant District Manager Brendan Berth. This meeting is called to order at 6:33 p.m. As a reminder, New York State law now requires all community board members to have their cameras on from the beginning of this meeting to the end of the meeting, and to have their first and last name displayed until the meeting is adjourned. If your camera is not on, your name is not properly displayed, you cannot count towards quorum. Members of the public, you may raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature on Zoom. If there is time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Eva Marie Lasner has kindly volunteered to take meetings minutes tonight. Thank you, Eva Marie. We will now take attendance by roll call. Brendan, will you conduct roll call?
Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Jim Collins.
Here.
B. Disman.
Present.
Ned Kalani.
Present.
Ava Marie Lassiter.
Present.
Steve O.
Present.
Reshma Patel.
Present.
Lou Sapersky is absent. And Hannah Singleman.
Present.
Has anybody, I'm sorry, has anybody heard from Lou? I haven't heard from him in a long time. Is he okay?
Marty heard from him.
He's okay.
Yeah, Marty heard from him.
All right. No need to say anything further. I just want to make sure he's okay.
The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand. Seeing no objections, the agenda is adopted as presented before you. The minutes from the March 13th meeting of this committee were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there is no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the March 13th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. Thank you. In order to conduct an efficient meeting tonight, let's observe a few ground rules. No one may speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. And please be mindful when you're speaking of being to the point, and so we can allow everyone who has a comment to make a comment. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand in Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When the committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. And once again, a reminder that committee members, you're required by New York State Open Meetings Law to have your Zoom cameras on and your first and last names displayed during tonight's entire meeting, from the call to order to adjournment. If you must step away from your computer briefly, you are required to leave your camera on. So tonight's agenda will be followed, and our topics are continued discussion of S227 A1075, which would authorize New York City to establish a program to convert dwellings in basements and cellars into safe and legal housing, which we discussed at our March meeting. And Nad Kilani, the vice chair of this committee, is going to lead this discussion as I have a conflict of interest. And we are following up. This bill did not pass in the state Senate or the state assembly yet. And this was something that, as you may remember, Assemblymember Harvey Epstein came and spoke to us about, and is something that he said he would like our support for. So NAD has drafted a resolution which was distributed to everybody, and we want to discuss it further because we did not have a vote on this or a consensus on how we want to move forward with this. So Nad, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you, Shma. So yes, just some context on how I thought about the resolution and just like the whole discussion here. I think last time we got into more of a point of like, do we want to like how is the basement bill, like, how are these things actually going to be like operationalized? And I think like the thing that's important here is that this is actually just authorizing New York City to create a program. So my whole thought thinking of the resolution here was let's push the New York State Assembly to allow the city to do that program. And we can follow up with a separate resolution that's going to be in conjunction with the Housing Committee of what we want that actual program to look like. And the thought process here is like, this is more like a governmental affairs one because it's saying it's just creating that permit for the assembly to do this. But then I think when we do the actual like details of it and hashing out like, what does that basement bill look like? What do we want to put in that exact details for the New York City? That would have to be in conjunction with the Housing Committee is how I thought about that. And that's what this resolution basically does. It just says, hey, we support New York State Assembly of pushing for this, but we leave the door open for us to have more specificity on like what the actual program looks like at the city level.
Can you scroll that slowly? I don't see any in my email anything with the draft solution. I'm reading it now for the first time.
It was distributed with the meeting reminder. I think it was sometime maybe Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, I have it Friday at 11:34 a.m. I think.
Stand by. Let me just grab that one.
Yes, B, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I see where you're going with the resolution, with it being resolved, the support of passing a program. But, and then we would talk about the actual program itself and what we want. But going through your whereases, you're really talking about a lot of the risks that currently exist. So talking about all these risks, at-risk flooding, what happened during the superstorm and all the other, it almost reads with all of these negative stuff that we should not support the program. And I know you have the words, go back to where it was resolved, go down. You have this program to legalize such dwellings, but we don't really talk about a program that would take into account the current risks. And I think we should really talk about that because you highlight it in the resolution.
Yeah, it's a fair point. So I guess just so I understand like where you're coming from, I think like how I thought about it is basically the whereas are basically to your point, establishing that like as the basement dwellings exist today, there are a lot of risks because they are like illegal / unregulated. And I just wanted to put that context forward to say, hey, like this is why it's important to allow New York City to do it. But open to thoughts on like how you think we can amend it, like open to amendments in terms of like what we should add for that. I just didn't want to get too in the weeds of like, hey, like here's what we actually want to see out of it, because I think that would be more like a housing committee type thing. But also I think here it's just saying like, let's get this done. Let's get this like, approved at the state level so that they can do that more at like we can actually do a city level bill, because to your point, there are meaningful risks to leaving them unregulated as they are today.
So what I was going to recommend is you add a couple of words to your whereas it be resolved. And when you say establish a program to legalize specific basement and cellar dwellings, taking in consideration current risks that exist.
I'm good with that. I mean, I like that. Thank you, E.
You're welcome.
Jim, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak in opposition, not so much to your resolution, but to the underlying legislation. This, first of all, as I explained, and you can go back and read the minutes last month, we have a lot of over-income people living in public housing and in affordable housing that shouldn't be there. And the city's done nothing and the state has done nothing to evict them. I'm also concerned that the economics of this doesn't really play out. They're giving the tenants who may have to be removed to manage these renovations a right of first refusal. If you read through the legislation, the explanation, they're giving them the right of first refusal. But you know, if somebody does extensive work on a basement apartment, how are they going to collect the additional rent? And I understand that there's a program to supplement the builder or the homeowner, but and that's being provided for. But you know, a lot of the people who live in these basement apartments are barely making rent as it is, and assuming that they're able to increase the rent for the additional cost of these renovations, how are they going to make the rent? And the third thing is, what if we do? Let's assume a property owner has finished the basement, and we get another Sandy type flood, and then he has to go back and re-renovate. Who's going to bury the Who's going to bury the cost of the additional debt? Is it going to be the homeowner? Is it going to be the tenant? Is it going to be the state? I don't know. I don't see this thing working out very well at all. And finally, as I expressed last month, I see this as the first step on a increasing road of downgraded standards for housing and building codes. We're getting literally swamped by migrant coming across the border. We have an enormous shortage, and the mayor today just put everybody on notice that we have to have every available facility in the city used for to house the migrants. You know what that means. That means that things are going to be downgraded. We're going to start reducing standards in living spaces. We don't address the actual issue, which is we don't have a secure border. So I'm opposed to the resolution.
Thanks, Jim.
As I say, not the resolution, but the legislation. I think it's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, I'll let Reshma go in a second, but I think from my reaction, I think a lot of your points, I understand where you're coming from. For me, my view on this is just that, like, the standards going down isn't something that we have to remit, right? Like, the resolution isn't necessarily saying that we're going to sort of, bring down our standard and like that. This is just saying, how do we increase the amount of available housing such that, we can allow people to live in like normal places. But the other point I have on my other view on this is that people are living in these basement units already today, and the standards are basically non-existent, which is why people lost their lives in the superstorm. So by bringing them into the fold of regulation, we can at least have some say on the standards versus today where there are no clear means of egress and things like that. So I think it's just, how do we, increase the housing stock? To your point, like, there are people coming to this city. How do we ensure they're housed, but in a way where we can actually know that they're living in regulated units instead of non-regulated units? Reshma, you have the floor.
Yes, and so this is a point of information, and you addressed some of it, Nad. where, we had people die because these were not regulated and people living in them illegally, because the current city law is that you cannot use such dwellings for housing. And most of the homeowners, and to the point that the homeowners themselves are immigrants who bought these homes with the intention that they could get money for these basement apartments. And, so there's a pressure point on the other side where people, and they used to be legal and then they became illegal. And then there are a lot of people who are going into foreclosure because they didn't have the money to pay their monthly payments because these apartments were no longer allowed. And if there was a storm, regardless of whether or not they're renovated or these rules go into place, you're still going to have to renovate, because whether they meet code or don't meet code, another superstorm is going to cause a lot of problems, as we saw just a few years ago.
Thanks, Reshma. B, you have the floor.
Yeah, as I said, I support this resolution because of the fact that there's no regulation now. And really support the fact that you get it into a regulated environment. We have to admit the fact that the city and the state needs more housing. But this is not dealing with the housing issue per se that will give us a lot of additional housing, but it will regulate it to make sure there's some safety conditions and the things that need to take place. And so I think it's one step, and I think it's an important step to get regulation there. That's why I would support it.
Thanks, B. And yeah, I agree with you. This doesn't solve like the housing crisis by any means, but at least to make sure people are living in safer places, and brings it in under the regulation. Jim, you have the floor.
Yeah, I also meant to mention that this may effectively gentrify some of those basement apartments that, if somebody's living there and has to move out because it's being renovated, they go back, they can't afford the rent. They'll simply find another space that is probably worse than the existing space that they're in. And the renovated, safer basement space will be occupied by college kids, somebody like that, somebody that doesn't have an awful lot of income. I think I see it backfiring. I don't see this working at all. And basically what you ought to do, if you're going to do anything, is enforce the code and ban the basement apartments. Make the landlords bring them up to code if that's what you're concerned with. And if people can't afford to do that, then they shouldn't be renting the apartments. And as I said before, last month, the 10,000 people who are living, or 10,000 units that are currently occupied in NYCHA housing by people who are over income should be evicted. And the people that are living in basement apartments now that are illegal should be moved into those apartments.
Thanks, Jim. I was reading the comptroller's report, and he actually mentioned that he thinks that 300,000 to 500,000 people live in these basement dwellings across the city. So I do think that I agree 10,000 people in NYCHA is an issue, but I think there are multiple ways to get at it. But I also think your point of if we can't make these safe, we should ban them, doesn't really resonate with me, at least, and open to hear how others think about it, because you have sort of 2 points there, right? One is, okay, these can get gentrified and then people have to move out. The other one is banning it. And I think of those 2 options, we want to leave this housing stock and make it safe, because I think the crisis that we're suffering right now is that we don't have enough housing. So I think banning it isn't a real solution here. And I think if we have to do something with it, I'd rather not ban it and at least bring it under the umbrella of regulation that will ensure the people who are living there are safe. I think, to the point, and this is more a housing committee topic, but how do we increase the amount of housing so that people are all able to live in safe places? That's another separate issue that I know everybody's sort of conscious and working on. But I think, in the sort of niche of this topic, I think it makes sense to say, how do we make these units as safe as possible without necessarily decreasing the housing stock?
Right, but you're still going to end up with gentrified basement apartments. People who can't, the people who live in the basement apartments, and long story short, we had a babysitter that my wife and I paid pretty well. Basically, she was making as much as a New York City police officer. So she bought a house. Her husband was did her dirty, basically, mortgaged the house up the hill. Eventually, she lost it. They ended up living in a basement apartment, which I ended up, visiting. If she moved out because of the renovation and had the rent raised, she'd have been in a pretty hard pressed place. I think it's going to gentrify. Thank you.
B, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'd like to call the question. I don't know if anyone's seconding.
Yeah, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So when I call your name, please say whether you're in favor, opposed, abstain, or abstain for cause. Jim Collins,
I'm opposed.
V. Dismond,
4.
Ned Kalani,
4.
Ava Marie Lassiter,
4.
Steve O,
4.
Reshma Patel,
Abstain for cause.
and Hannah Singleman.
4.
Okay. With 5 in favor, 1 opposed, no abstentions, and 1 abstention for cause, the resolution passes.
Thanks, Brendan.
And then,
Yeah, sorry, go for it.
I was just going to say, just to clarify, since this doesn't seem time sensitive, I'm assuming this is going before June's full board, not May's, or am I incorrect?
Yeah, I would be okay with that. I think the whole purpose is just to support sort of these bills, but I think that it's not like the bill as it stands right now isn't going to pass in this session. So I don't think there's like a time sensitive reason for this.
Okay, just checking. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. And I'll pass it back to Reshma. Thanks,
Okay.
Reshma.
And thank you so much, Nad. And so next on our agenda, and again, this is something that a suggestion made by our Vice Chair Nad is in terms of what we discuss here on the Budget Committee, especially on the governmental affairs side. As you all know, the fall gets very busy because we're doing the budget request. And in the spring, we'd like to focus on governmental issues, especially during when the state legislature is in session. But so in thinking about how we can make this better, NAD suggested that we take a look at other community board best practices, and we want to open that up to see if other people on this committee thought that was a good idea, and if people want to take on, say they're going to look at like this community board, what they do if people have ideas. So I'm going to open it up for discussion. And Nat, if you'd just like to add to that, since it was your.
Yeah, really quickly. I don't think there's too much context here, but I know in the housing committee, one thing we were looking at is just how does we looked at basically the other community boards to what is the best practices of things like resources share on the website. And that's what basically inspired this of, I know in the fall, we're going to be busy with budget, but what are sort of the best practices of community boards doing in terms of governmental affairs? Is there anything for us to really look at there? And how we did it there was basically, we each took 2 or 3 community boards from Manhattan and basically said, let's look at their websites, let's look at recent resolutions and just go from there. And it was just a way to help us figure out what really the resources are there. I think here it's basically, how do we make sort of governmental affairs the best way, the most efficient part possible. And that doesn't necessarily be that we're agreeing with what the other community boards do, but if they're saying something or hey, either we agree or disagree with it, we can bring a resolution here to at least make sure that our view is known to the powers that be.
Yeah, and even on the budget side, if people are doing things here, I think that input would be welcome. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this? And does anyone want to volunteer to help us do this research?
I see Steve and Hannah have their hands raised.
Okay, good. For some reason, I'm not seeing the hands. I will let Hannah, you can speak, and then Stephen will give you the floor.
I'm happy to help. I think it's a great idea. And I feel like it would also be great to just have a broader conversation too about what worked well from last time we did that, and not necessarily what other community boards are doing, but like, are there best practices that we would want to instill? So I'm all for this, happy to help. And I think it'll be a good conversation to have.
Thank you. And Steve?
Observing from last year's exercise, wonder if it also makes sense to observe I guess oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the name of it, the mission statement, the district mission.
Oh, the district needs statement.
District needs statement. Thank you. If that helps each committee prioritize their budget, because a certain amount of money may have a greater impact or a quicker effect than others. For example, large capital projects like a subway, as much as the neighborhood would like one, it'd be tough to push that versus something that can affect the community more immediately with a lower budget. Just wondering if that's something that we have to revisit the district needs statement to help each committee members help prioritize what they think makes sense to put it in order. The toughest part has always been, what order do they put this in?
No, and Steve, that's a good point. Our next topic of discussion is the update on the budget request. So with the email that you got last week, with the reminder for this meeting, we got a response back on the budget request we had from the Office of Management and Budget. And that process is also ongoing, where we're going to be, I've reached out to the other committee heads to see what updates they want to make. And it's not just the table, but also the district needs statement. And that's a discussion that's been happening. I think I've been on this committee 4 or 5 years now. And each year, very changes on that district needs. Like, each committee is not changing it that much. And maybe we need to look at what other people are doing. And there's also been this discussion, which we've had every year, and some people feel very strongly about this, is whether or not, as you said, do you put a request, like our number one request is build more affordable housing, build a new park. And perhaps those types of projects may never get funded. And should we concentrate on the smaller projects that could get funded? And maybe we do look at other community boards and see what they do. We as a community board, both on the committee, but I feel even broader community board, has always thought that we need to make the highest ask that we can, even if we keep on getting no from the Office of Management and Budget and the different agencies. But I'm open to discussion on that, because that's something that each time I read the response, I think to myself, should we be doing it this way?
And hence why it's so difficult to order them. Yeah.
But anyways, thank you. And I think we can just move on to the updated air table, which Brendan, if you can share.
I think both Jim and I have our hands up to talk about this comments.
Oh, for some reason, I do not see hands, and I have everyone's in my window. So I apologize, B, and then I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, so I did want to comment that I had the experience when I did the bylaws of looking at all the community boards. And it is really enlightening to see how far ahead we are than many of the other community boards.
Yeah.
And so when I was looking for bylaws, I looked at the whole city, and the CB6 office actually helped me do all of this. And then we decided that we really needed to stay within Manhattan, because if you looked at some of the practices in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, it's very loose in most places. So I think it's a great idea, but I think we should focus on what's happening in Manhattan first. And you won't find an awful lot, by the way, on websites. It was very disappointing in what we found, because, the bylaws are the principal operations. So you should have some consistency, of how you present things, what your executive committees are like, what your parliamentary procedures are. And it was just something that it surprised me, and surprised me that the borough president's offices don't have a standard that we should all be using. And so that was quite an experience. And that's why it took us a little longer, because we wanted to look at ourselves in relationship to others. And it turned out that we were probably among the best in what we had done over the years. So I just want to say, I think it's a good project, but don't expect total success in the ideas. If you get a couple, I think it will be great.
Thank you, B, for that insight. And then that also helps us give a framework as to, because I think overall we have maybe like 59 community boards in the city. So that's a lot.
Yeah, we looked at all
Manhattan
59 and then went down to Manhattan.
Yeah, Manhattan has 12, much more manageable. But you also remind me, because I've been told by a lot of people, the electeds and the borough president, that we have one of the best run community boards in, at least in Manhattan. And then what I hear from friends who serve in the other boroughs, it is very, very different. And perhaps maybe something we should also think about is how we try to help people make their community boards more efficient and productive. Jim?
Yeah, I just a second big here to what Dee said, and also I think perhaps we might suggest as a resolution that we do to the borough president that we do standardize some of these procedures, because if somebody's coming in and putting up a piece of real estate or trying to get something done as a budget item, and presenting, let's say something that crosses board boundaries, they shouldn't have to go through, look at multiple processes for each of the boards. It should be standardized, and I would just correct you, Reshma, in one respect. What I hear is that we are among the best. We are the best managed board. So, and the one thing I've always had on any of these budget requests is that people try to do them with some level of specificity, utilize the stuff that's in the Department of City Planning website. Instead of saying broad numbers, we need more affordable housing. Well, how many units? What type of units? Senior housing, supportive housing, how many units, and what part of the district? And those sorts of things. We've never done that. And, always done. I find that if you tell people specifically what you need, will work to fund it. Whereas if you simply put out a generic more, well, I'd like to win a lot. So I would just need to be specific about it.
Thank you, Jim. And when we look at the Airtable, you'll see that the responses that we got from the agencies in OMB does kind of lead to what you're saying too, that what they've asked us or commented on. So does anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands up, but if Brendan or Nat, if you guys see anybody, please let me know.
I don't see anyone's hands raised.
Okay, so then we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the response that we got to our budget request from OMB. And Brendan, if you can share the Airtable.
And I'm also gonna zoom in a little bit. Hopefully that's large enough for people, but if not, please let me know. Or if it's too large.
Yeah, or we can also put the link in the chat too, if people want to open up on their computer. It is also on the website, but it may not be as accessible to people right now.
Brandon, if you can make it just a tiny bit larger, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Brendan.
Expand the agency response. Oh,
This is for the first item. I'll note just for everyone's reference that these are the latest responses from the city.
Yes, and thank you, Brendan, so much for updating this very quickly for us and for this meeting.
No problem.
And so while people, if you haven't had a chance to look at the, this until right now, you can take a look at what's on your screen, but I'll just point out a few things to what was said earlier. Our request for supportive housing request, which was number one on our list here. The response we got was it needs to be broken out more. And, OMB said that some of this can be funded, but it needs to be more detailed and broken out. And similarly, our ADA compliant subway station request, we also got the response that requires further study. So I think this year we need to be more specific in our requests. Some of the things that did get funded is the Eastside Esplanade is fully funded as per their response. Improvements in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza has been funded, but not the fountains. Something else that was brought to our attention is, we had this whole issue about the sidewalk repairs, and they're saying that the responsibility of the owner. There was some question when we discussed this last year as whose responsibility it was. Another big issue that we've had come up for many years on this board is about the bus parking, especially in like the East 30 areas. And, the response we got is it requires further study. And, there's some items like we had another request we had was job training. And, the response is that that's something that HRA already does. And our request for research on and contracting for more restrooms and shower services, they said that this is not something that's a budget request. And there's one other thing that they said is not a budget request. Oh yeah, a comprehensive census on facilities for the homeless was a request that they said that this is not something that would go into a budget request.
Question.
Yes, Steve?
Sorry, I don't know if you could see my hand lowering or not. I have, two questions. Is this sorted by capital expense and continued support? Or is it actually put in order? Because it looks like the first 26 is just capital projects.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
go ahead, Brent.
Okay, it's not
Just
by,
break
it's just
it
by
up
chance
again.
it's that way. Sorry.
They break it up by capital and expense.
No, I mean the budget request. This is put in order of rank, right? Not capital. It just happens that.
No, so we rank them. We do capital first, then expense, then ongoing, and then we rank each of them that way.
Okay.
So we have a ranking for each category, basically.
Okay.
When we put it together, then we submit one big one.
My second question, how do you, in reference to them asking us to be a little bit more specific or breaking it down a little bit more, is that something we could further inquire about? Like, how do we even begin with that?
Yeah, so we, and this is something I wanted to, discuss with everyone here. And then there's two paths that I want to take with this. Is one, we respond to them saying, to OMB itself, saying, thank you for, telling us this. What do you need us to do when you say further study? When you say broken out, like, how do you want us to break it out? But I'm also going to go to each of the committees and ask them to also think about how they would do it too, because these requests came from the committee, and also have them, OMB gives us the response, but they are talking to the different agencies, and to see that we also have the, if it's housing, we have the housing agency person talking to our housing committee so they can figure out exactly what they need to do.
I see that Hannah has her hand raised.
Perfect. Is one clarifying question and then a build on that. Is the OMB, the Office Management and Budget, is that the primary audience of this list? Like when we finalize it every year, that's who it goes to?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible? I don't know if we've done this in the past. Could we get them in to do almost this? Like, I feel like it would be helpful for me to have a better understanding of exactly how they're using it, what they're looking for. And I think it even builds on Stephen's question of like, what kind of specificity do they need? Is it possible to bring them in for almost like a work session type of thing where they can tell us? Because I think that would help us make it the best case it can be by the time it gets to them and help us prioritize knowing what they're looking for.
Hannah, that's a great suggestion. And I can reach out to them and ask if someone can come speak to us. And perhaps we can have that maybe even for our June meeting, because then it'll be before we are still in the process of, in September, we'll have our public meeting for the budget and we'll be submitting our request in October. So it really would be good to get them in June so we know what their input is.
Great. Thank
I
you.
would add,
I can help with communications
Yeah.
with them or anything.
and I would add that with OMB, while OMB is the kind of the master keeper of all this, so they get our request as well as all the other 59 community boards around the city, but then they liaison with the different agencies. And so they'll take our request, say, okay, like we got these kind of requests for HRA, we got these for housing, these for education, and then each of those agencies gets back to OMB, and then they again filter through everything and then respond to us.
Well, because it might even be a helpful, like, how can we make their lives easier? How can they make our lives easier? But how can we make their lives easier so that when it comes time to prioritization? So thank you. I think it'll be great if we can get them in.
We've
Jim?
cleared out all the stuff that, I'm sorry. We've cleared out, I'm sorry.
Question from the public.
I just want to make sure we've cleared out all these stuff that has been funded or taken care of.
So Jim, I didn't hear what you said. You're breaking out there.
Sorry. I just want to make sure that on this budget, on these budget requests, we've cleared out everything that has been taken care of, or maybe made some of them more specific. For example, number 21 on the capital expenses, municipal facilities for CD6. That was intended to allow a larger meeting space, as I remember. And it said CB6 has secured a new office a few years ago, but we request a city-owned multi-use.
Yeah, so to answer your question, this is exactly what we've updated right now. What Brendan has updated is exactly the response that we got, and we haven't cleared out what's been funded. It's for two reasons.
Okay.
One, I wanted the response before we made changes. I didn't want just Brendan or I making those changes, but and I also want to talk to each committee heads also about what we got as a response. But secondly, what we've been doing as a board, even when something has been funded, we keep it on the list until the monies actually come in and the project is done.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Incidentally speaking, one other question. I'm sorry, other people have their hands raised. I didn't buy that rule. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
So I just wanted to comment about, I think you spoke about it. OMB is the umbrella agency. It really is the individual agencies. And in seeing some of these requests for specificity, I think I'm a little jaded when it comes to budgets over the years. That really is a standard block response from agencies. Like when you talk about more housing, it's very difficult for us to come up with specificity. Do we want 6,000 more units? Do we want this? You're getting into a dialogue that's really totally beyond what a priority would be. So I would be careful asking about specificity and understanding that or it's not operational, or it's not capital. Those are standard responses to budgets.
Okay, thank you, B, for that background. So this is nothing, like these responses really aren't anything new.
They're not new. Many of us who are bureaucrats have used them in the past.
Okay, Jim?
Well, first of all, there's a question from someone observing, in the
So
chat,
we do,
in the Q and
we do,
A.
so we do committee first.
Okay.
I don't actually, yeah, but I will have, why don't you speak, or if that was your comment, then I'll have Brendan read the question from the Q&A.
Well, no, the rest of the question is that, whether or not these are, I'm sorry, let me get back.
But Brendan has actually already answered the question in the
Oh,
Q&A.
it's already
That's
been grabbed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
why-
answered the question because it's one that can be answered by going to our website. So I provided links.
Okay, so the question that I had was, have we heard anything more from the governor about now that the pandemic is officially over? Have we heard anything further about in-person meetings versus these video meetings? I knew there was legislation being pressed to allow all future community board meetings to be made remote, but I don't know the current position.
So
If that's the case, then we don't need a facility.
so Brendan, I'll turn the floor to you.
Yeah, so I haven't heard anything further from the governor, but I do know that we are still going through these sort of 30-day orders from the mayor's office. So yeah, it's 3 days here, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. So no, I haven't heard anything further myself.
Okay. Thanks.
And I see
Third
Steve has
question.
his hand raised.
Hi, Steve.
Thank you. This might be a question for the OMB if we are, they do decide to present. One of the things that would be nice to help with these requests and these responses, I don't know if it's protocol or if it's allowed, do they tell us who the liaison is to the respective agency? Because it would certainly help since they are the umbrella. It would help to know the communication path of who they talk to, so that maybe we as a community board or the subcommittees or even the public could pursue it further if it's something that's important to them. I don't know if that's something that the OMB would share.
No, so they do share it. And if you look at the document that was shared in the email last week that Brendan sent, that's a PDF document. That's not the Airtable, which was sent to us by OMB. That on the first, I think the second and third page has a liaison for each agency for us. And if you don't have that,
yes, it's like the third or fourth page. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so I actually, B, I have a question for you, given, your experience with this. Do you think it's helpful for us to have someone from OMB come speak to us?
I think it would be helpful to have someone, if OMB is willing to come to speak to us. But I think what might be even better is to get some liaisons from some of the agencies, if we could arrange something like a panel discussion, because you know what our top priorities are and you know what their responses are, and you really want to know what they're looking for. So not just the umbrella, but just if we point out 2 or 3 agencies that we really want to dig in, and if they're willing to have the liaison person come, I think that would be a great discussion.
Thank you for that suggestion. I think that's a good idea. So, again, I don't know how likely it is for us to be able to get people as quickly as June, but I will work with the office. We have everyone's contact information, and I'll just send an email out and we can call them as well. And hopefully we can try to get people in. And the panel discussion is a great idea because we can have someone from OMB, but then maybe, you know, we get housing, transportation, you know, liaison. Those are like our biggest requests. Parks, so.
Maybe we should afford with all of the committee chairs.
Yes. That's also a good idea to do that.
Yeah.
I have not yet. After this meeting is when I was going to send this then to all the committee chairs, and now that the Airtable is updated, but hopefully, you know, we'll get other people from the board to attend as well. And and to that point, for everybody, I mean, I think everyone else on this committee serves on another committee. And what difficulty I have is when I email committee chairs, I sometimes don't get a response. Not everybody is responsive. So if you are serving on another committee, on that committee in other business or whenever someone is talking about topics, if you can bring up the fact that they need to discuss budget request, both the Airtable, but also updating their part of the community needs statement. And if everybody can do that on whatever committees they serve, that I think would be helpful in moving this process along. And to Steve's point, that lots of stuff is really dated in the community needs statement. And that's partially because we don't always get the kind of input we would want.
Jim's hand is up.
Brendan, further to the question that came from the observer, is this version of the Airtable going to be up on the community board website so that the public can weigh in?
Yeah, it's already up on the website. If you go to our website, which for any members of the public present is cbsix.org. And you near the top of our homepage, there is a button called budget requests. If you click on that, you'll see the latest, you know, the most current budget requests we have, as well as the responses city agencies gave to the community board on our budget requests. Responses that we have received in the last week. So I guess you can say it's hot off the press, or at least warm off.
So the public can see the draft.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? I don't see any hands up, but if, you know, Brendan, if you see anyone else.
I do not.
Okay, I don't have anything else then on this matter. And I'm gonna waive my report because that was essentially, you know, what we discussed as the budget committee from now until October. That is our big priority now, is to get this updated and get the community needs statement together to submit on October 31st. Does anybody have any old or new business?
I see Jim's hand is raised.
Jim?
Since B raised the issue about you know, how things are done with different boards and what have you, I think it might behoove us to have to raise the issue either at our committee or through the executive committee about approaching the borough president to standardize some of the things that do happen at community boards in Manhattan. In terms of an agenda, maybe a common website, and how things are proposed, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much difference in one borough, I think is needlessly bureaucratic, and it might behoove Manhattan to have a single platform where people can know how to move within the community boards, have a set boilerplate of committees, and a set boilerplate of operating. It's just a thought, something that we might want to discuss at a future meeting and possibly put together as a resolution and proposal for borough board.
I mean, I think that's a really good idea. And, I think it does fall into this committee because under governmental affairs, I feel that
Exactly.
what we are trying to is good government. And having that transparency, consistency would be a good government issue. And we should write a resolution, and then we should talk to the chair because, he's the one who's going to the borough board meeting. But we also, I also know the borough president very well too, so I can just also reach out to him. But we can go through, that process. And I feel that the borough president probably would be open to this, given all the stuff that they've been doing with community boards since he became borough president. And the Civic Engagement Commission, like the last couple of trainings we've had were through the Civic Engagement Commission, who's trying to now become more involved in how community boards work. And that is citywide as opposed to just by borough. And I think that the existence of the Civic Engagement Commission should also be to make sure that we had good government policies in New York City. All right, anyone else? I don't see any hands up. Jim, I assume that's from
Motion
before?
to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Okay, I think we don't need a second for that. So it's 7:30.